Okay, so I think we are just about ready to begin. It's a very big honor for us to have Rabbi Breitowitz with us tonight. If you haven't yet heard of him, you've been looking in the wrong places for your news. Someone who, I don't know how to introduce him. You read the what we put out. Someone who has a width and breadth of knowledge in all aspects of Torah and also of the real world. Part of what makes it just a religion. From the theoretical to the practical. Very big privilege to have him here with us tonight. And without further ado, we have some pre-submitted questions, or all the questions that we have were pre-submitted, and we'll just go through them one after another. Touch them. Rabbi Gernes will post the question in the chat. I'll read it out loud, and then we're looking forward to hearing the Rav's approach.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that I'm very honored to participate. Thank you for inviting me. As you know, of course, we in Israel are going through a crisis, but I also know that all of you are with us, and we all share the same crisis. That is the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of hatred of Jews. You in Europe know that for a very, very long time. So in a sense, it's not even a question of your having empathy for us. We're all sharing the same tzara, the same adversity, and we have to give each other strength. We have to give each other support. We have to know that ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves Bnei Yisrael, loves Am Yisrael, and will bring the Yeshua, although there may be sacrifices on the way. And the love and the achdut that we have is a tremendous, tremendous resource that opens the gates of heaven. So I'm very, very happy to kind of build my little bridge between Yerushalayim and even Berlin.
Thank you. I think you may have began at least answering the first question on the list, which is that obviously we here following events in Eretz Yisroel and trying to do what we can to help. But what should our hashkafa be regarding this war? I don't know what exactly the questioner meant by that, but I'll leave that to you to.
Well, here is the thing. All of us have a desire to do something. We feel we have to do something. But sometimes the most important thing to do, in fact, maybe most of the time, the most important thing to do is to focus on prayer, on tefillah, on Torah learning, on charity, on tzedakah, on Avat Yisrael, which I think is a biggie. We don't even remember anymore, but if you recall the events before October 7th, Israeli society was being torn apart by all sorts of divisive issues. People were saying that the state of Israel is simply going to implode, not because of outside enemies, but because of the hatred and polarization that exists. The one lesson that this war teaches us is that Hamas did not care if you had a black kippah or a knitted kippah or no kippah at all, if you were Jewish. Again, very similar to the Nazis all the way back. And we have to learn from the bad guys that we too shouldn't make these differences, that we have to be together, we have to have Ahavas Yisrael, and we have to turn to God, Hashem, as the ultimate source of Yeshua. So in terms of demonstrations, in terms of rallies, as I'm sure you heard yesterday, there was a huge, huge rally in Washington, D.C., and they say perhaps it was up to 290, maybe close to 300,000 Jews, and it was peaceful, nonviolent. In a way, it was a Kiddush Hashem. But I have a bit of an ambiguity regarding rallies and the like. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. I think it's sometimes better for Jews to have a lower profile and not necessarily agitate politically in open ways. But, again, as I say, there are different ways of looking at it. But in terms of what you can do individually, I think you have to find your talent and the like. But I think your prayers, your mitzvahs, your good wishes, your financial support for the people in the army and for the hundreds of families that were displaced from their homes really, really, truly makes a difference. And I think there's a form among Jews, at least, there's a form of mental telepathy. We can kind of feel when you're thinking about us And that really makes a big difference. I don't think you should necessarily think you have to be engaged in frenetic activity that may look like you're doing a lot, but it may not do as much as these smaller gestures that are more meaningful. I hope that kind of answers the question.
I mean, I'm going to stick in my 2 cents here. There's a Gemara which appears, I think, in Rosh Hashanah, and I think in Tainus as well, where it speaks about a Zera that Rome made on the Jewish people. And they took an Eitzah from a Matronisa, from a Roman powerful woman who told the Chachamim that they should go out and protest at night. And they went out and they protested at night. Is that not a source for activism?
I think it's a good point, and indeed, in that Gemara, the basic protest was we're brothers, we have a certain connection with each other. The only thing is, again, it may be helpful, but I think against the particular enemy of Yishmael that we face, I think the hatred is so enmeshed, it is so deep, that we're not even at a place where we reasonably can have any type of dialogue. I mean, you have generations of people who have been brainwashed from the time they were babies to hate Jews, to destroy Jews, to destroy the state of Israel, and the like. So I guess what you're suggesting is that might be a precedent for something like the DC rally.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we're ready yet to have any type of negotiation with people who don't acknowledge our right to exist. And that's going to be a very, very critical issue. You have to have two sides. Each one considers the other side a human being entitled to a certain modicum of dignity. So, by Teva, I'm in favor of conciliatory gestures and making shalom and working things out. But the mentality of the other side is not there at all. There is quite literally nobody to talk to. So what are you supposed to do? I know that Israel has been criticized a lot for all of the civilian deaths, but the IDF is the most conscientious moral army in the world in terms of trying to minimize civilian casualties. If civilians, number one, they're given warning. I don't recall Hamas giving any warning before they did what they did. Israel gives warning, which includes giving warning to Hamas, so they know what's coming. And number two, Hamas builds all of its military facilities in hospitals and in schools and in residential areas. So really, the responsibility for this is Hamas, which quite literally does not care for its own people. But in terms of dialogue, as I say, we have nobody to dialogue with. So what are we going to do at this particular point? So it's not a great situation. I don't like it. I feel tsar as a Jew should feel when any person dies. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said when the Mitzrayim were dying, right? So we don't rejoice. We do what we have to do because we don't believe in letting ourselves be killed. But there is no simcha in it. And I really, really wish there would be another way. And maybe B'ezrat Hashem, Chazal say, B'yacharis hayomim, Yishmael will do tshuva. And there's even a Maimer Chazal, Asa will do tshuva. And that day will come. And maybe the Abrahamic Accords were the beginning of that process. But it's become aborted. It's become terminated. And now it's literally a question of he who comes to kill you, you have to kill them first. And that's where we're at. It's not a happy occasion. There's no glorification of death in even secular Israeli culture and Kal v'chomer religious people.
Thank you. Jump around a bit, just because it's a related question to what you were just talking about, question 11. What is our attitude? Is there any room? The word revenge was thrown around a lot at the beginning, immediately after October 7th, that we need to take revenge. Is that something that belongs in our vocabulary at all? Or is this just a question of self-defense?
I do not believe that revenge is a legitimate issue. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kel Nekamot, because Hashem metes out personal justice, but this is not a midah that we are ever commanded to emulate. When we have a mitzvah to emulate Hashem, it is always expressed in the positive. Mahu Rachom, God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. There's never a Maimer Chazal anywhere that says Mahu Nokem Afatotikom. Revenge has no place, I think, even against the worst enemies, even against Nazis, Himach Shema. Revenge is not the relative vocabulary. Justice and, of course, protection of yourself and of the Jewish people. And we will kill, if necessary, to protect our Jews from aggression. So I'm not at all saying turn the other cheek. We have to be very aggressive in protecting Jewish lives. That's a great mitzvah of the Torah, lo tamod al tam re'echa, and that's Muhammad's mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to wage war, the Rambam says, to protect Jewish people from attack. So I'm not being soft on this, but I do reject the rubric of revenge. We're dealing with defense, we're dealing with self-protection, and that's as far as it goes. And when we get that objective achieved, and I hope it'll be very, very soon, then that's it. Then we have to work on shalom, building relationships, looking for the little avenues of hope. Maybe if Hamas indeed gets wiped out, maybe, I'm not sure, we'll find Palestinian people to talk to. Perhaps there'll be a new wave of consciousness. Again, I'm not particularly optimistic, but Chazal do say there'll be a tekufa of Yishmael doing tshuva, and maybe this will be the precursor to it. But I reject the concept of revenge on the part of a human being.
One more question on this topic before we move on to some other ones, which is question 2. How should one deal with deep grief and heartbreak?
Well, listen, how does one deal with deep grief and heartbreak? Number one, there is a process. I want to point out an interesting thing, I think. If you take some Eastern religions like Buddhism, they kind of go with the idea that suffering is an illusion. It's imaginary. It's not real. And you simply have to get yourself into reality, and then you will no longer be saddened by suffering. I think Judaism rejects that. We have, on one hand, we do say, whatever God does is for the good. The Mishnah says in Brachos, Chayav Adam levarech al hara, you have to make a blessing for bad tidings the way you make a blessing for good tidings, and it's not the same blessing, but you got to do it b'simcha. But Judaism says when you lose your father, you don't dance on the table and make shechianu. You say dayan ha'emet, you rip your garment, you grieve. Judaism recognizes that we are human, and even though in an ultimate sense all of God's ways are good, even though we don't understand them, but it's understood that we have to go through grieving and mourning. And therefore, one practical aspect is don't try to accelerate the process. I mean, the last thing you should tell a person in grief is get over it. They're not always supposed to get over it. They need to grieve, they need to mourn. And part of your achrayus as a compassionate friend, your responsibility as a compassionate friend is not to kind of poo-poo the suffering they're going through, but to hold their hand and be there with them. Just as Hashem is described as Imo Anochi B'tzara, Hashem is with us in our suffering. So that's one thing. You got to give it time. You have to give it time. You have to be able to grieve. You have to be able to cry and pour out your heart to Hashem. Even if it's complaining a little bit, even if it's saying, God, I don't understand why this is happening to me. Hashem wants to hear from you, even when you're complaining, even when the bitterness of your heart makes you say things that are maybe negative. But Hashem wants to hear from you. That's the first thing. But at the end of the day, if you're a believer, suffering is a little easier to handle because things are not arbitrary, they're not chaotic. We believe that the neshama is eternal, that even when the body is no longer here, or the body is buried in the ground, there is a soul that is united with God. Think about Olam Haba. Think about the eternal joy without pain, without suffering. Think about the fact that the person that you cared about is not abandoned, but is with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a good way. And by the way, I would add that even if they weren't even halachically observant, it could very well be, this is a longer discussion, that if they were killed because they were Jewish, there is a passage in the Rambam that some understand that is called death al Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctification of God's name, which gets them up to Olam Haba, no matter what their failings might have been in this world. So I think that can comfort a person. There's going to be resurrection of the dead. Eventually, we're going to be united. I mean, after all, we're all going to die at some point, but we're going to be reunited in our souls and eventually even in our bodies. So I think a person with emunah can have a lot more hope than a person without emunah. A person without emunah, without belief, so the person is gone. Once you're dead, you're gone. I'll never see you again. And that's going to be a very difficult thing to get over. But I think with Torah and with our emunah, we have certain tools that will enable us to go through this process. But as I say, don't rush it. Give yourself time to grieve. And eventually, la'at, you're never going to forget the tragedy, but you'll be able to store it in the back of your mind, compartmentalize it. It's not going to be all encompassing. And then you'll be able to re-enter the world. You'll be able to be productive. You'll be able, as it were, to contribute again, and even to feel happiness. At the moment, it may seem that that's impossible, that will never happen. But it will happen. This is one of the chasadim, one of the kindnesses God gave, the old saying, that time heals all wounds, that with time there is a healing that can take place. And if you need to see a bereavement counselor, some of them are very, very good. Hopefully you try to find a counselor that shares, or at least is familiar with, the Jewish values that you build your life upon. You don't want to see a therapist who has antagonistic values. But if you find such a person, and whether it can be through Zoom as well, somebody in a more established, larger religious community might have more choices, but you can do Zoom conferences. And this can be very, very beneficial. And also support groups, other parents or spouses who have gone through similar tragedies. You can share, because the truth is, it's been well said that if somebody, God forbid, lost a child, the only person that can really understand that is somebody who lost a child. You can have wonderful friends. If they haven't gone through it, they can't really understand. But you seek people out who know what you've been through because they've been through it or are going through it. That's a tremendous source of chizuk. Don't be alone. Connect to other people, and you'll get strength by that connection, and you'll give strength. And by the way, that's another aspect of it. That part of how we get over our grief is by reaching out and helping others. When you help others and go beyond yourself, you're going to find that your own pain is not as overwhelming as it once was. So those are some suggestions that I think can help people in this very, very difficult time.
Yeah. So I think we'll move on to some more broad questions about other topics. We said we have a wide audience over here, so different questions came from different sources. So number 3, is it realistic today to ask young Jews to abstain from physical contact before marriage? If so, why?
This is actually a very excellent question, and I'll tell you why. We live in the halacha community. We live in a very unnatural world. Our sages actually encouraged marriage at a fairly young age. Pirkei Avos says explicitly, Ben Shmona Asar L'chut, a man, should get married at the age of 18. That's where hormones are kicking in pretty intensively, and you're ready to get married. What we have now is, for a variety of reasons, maybe outside of some parts of the Hasidic community, people are just not ready to get married at 18. I could not tell an 18-year-old, I know Americans more, to get married at 18. the kid is very immature, doesn't know how to make a living, hasn't completed his education, is not emotionally ready. So it would be a catastrophe to tell an 18-year-old to get married. But what that means is we've created a tremendous imbalance because on one hand, halacha says you can't be intimate with a woman, you can't hold her hand, you can't hug her, you can't kiss her, you certainly cannot have sexual intercourse, but you're not ready for marriage, but your hormones are very, there's a lot of sexual arousal. So we've created a very, very difficult situation. See, it's interesting. If we were able to follow Judaism in its totality, things would work out very well. People would get married at 18, no problem. Unfortunately, because of the dysfunctions of our own society in general, we're not able to follow the Torah in its entirety, and as a result, we have a lot of distortions. So all I can say is I have a lot of sympathy for what young Jewish single men are going through. Women as well, although I think for women it might be a little less difficult, but still it's a struggle for men and for women. And of course, when you're an older bachelor, it's even more difficult. You're in your 20s, your 30s, or even beyond. So recognizing it is a struggle, recognizing that it is a challenge, recognizing that optimally we wish we wouldn't have to deal with this problem, there is still a case that is made for no sex before marriage, to be chaste, to be sanua, to be modest, to follow the rules of no yichud, no seclusion, no affectionate hugging and kissing until marriage. And it goes back to a very, very deep idea that Judaism is very different than the Christian tradition. The Christian tradition basically teaches that sexuality is something dirty, something filthy. And that's why a holy person like a priest is supposed to be celibate. And God allowed marriage to other people as a concession to their yetzer hara, better to marry than to go to hell, etc. Judaism is very different. In Judaism, we actually believe that the sexual union is holy. It is noble. It is sacred. It is, number one, the vehicle for the creation of life. And number two, even in a childless marriage, it is a vehicle for the expression of love. And in Kabbalah, we really can't go into all of the deep Kabbalah, the sexual union of man and woman is a mimicking of kind of a union within God, within the Godhead, that brings all sorts of blessing into the world. Now, precisely because sexuality is holy, it has to be within a holy and a sanctified relationship. Marriage, one of the words for marriage is kiddushin. Kiddushin means sanctification, holiness. That's a very, very, one sec, sanctification, holiness, and the like. And therefore, when you have sex outside of marriage, you're debasing it. You're taking something holy and noble, and you're making it into physical lust and release. And that is it's like, if you were to take a Sefer Torah and use it for a tablecloth, we would say that's disgraceful. Well, to use sexuality for gratification and release is like taking a Torah scroll and using it in the bathroom or using it on a table. So as a result, precisely because marital intimacy is so holy and elevated, it should be reserved for a relationship that is predicated on holiness. I recognize that's hard. I recognize it's a hard sell. I recognize that we're living in a kind of an unnatural environment. And I honestly don't know how to make it any easier for people. But ultimately, it's going to be worth the wait. Now, I just want to mention an interesting point. Some people have made the argument that it's better to live with somebody before marriage because that way you can check it out, that way you can see if it's right, and then you get married. Interestingly, counterintuitively, it's been found that people who live together before marriage and then get married have a higher divorce rate than people who didn't live together until they got married. So the concept that living together before marriage sometimes guarantees a better marriage is actually demonstrably false. It actually increases the divorce rate because you're not as committed to each other, because you recognize that, we can live together without marriage, so who needs marriage? So this, I think, is the case for marriage. Remember, it is kiddushin, it is sanctification, it is holiness. It is mimicking processes that occur within God's very essence.
Next, in the Talmud, and even more so in the Achronim, or maybe in the yeshiva world, Tanoim, Amoraim, Rishonim are often portrayed as perfectly rational without feelings and emotions. Is this true? And is this something that we want to achieve?
So first of all, I want to take a little bit of an issue on this. If you go back to the Gemaras and to the Medrash and you actually read the primary sources, I think you have actually a very different picture. I think you see human beings with emotions, with passions, with feeling. The problem is not so much in what the texts say, but it's kind of the interpretation that we give it in the yeshiva and rabbinical world, in which we try to whitewash things, we try to cover up things, we try to redefine things, and then we get the unrealistic picture of the perfect person, but that's not the picture of Chazal, and it's not even the picture of the Torah itself. You see, it's very, very interesting. The great Rav Hutner, Zichrono Livracha, back in the 1970s, was very critical of the genre of Gedolim biographies. These are the biographies of great, great rabbis. And although I think the genre has gotten better, but in his day, there was always this standard story of the perfect person who, from the time he was born, was perfect. When he was 4-year-old, he knew the Talmud. When he was 5 years old, he knew the Yerushalmi, etc. He learned, 22 hours a day. And even when he slept, he was learning Torah. And these are great, great stories. But Rav Hutner said, number one, what do they teach me? I read about this super genius. I'm never going to be him. My kids aren't going to be him. What is the lesson that I get? And number two, Rav Hutner said, the stories are only giving you partial, even if they're true to the degree that they're telling things. But we don't read about the struggles. We don't read about the failures. We don't read about the mistakes. And in many, many ways, that would have been a better biography, because when I learn how a great person fails and makes mistakes, but still rises above, that's a message I can take. Now, I understand there may be halachic issues of Lashon Hara in those types of biographies, but I think that's certainly the approach the Torah takes. The Torah clearly talks about struggle. It talks about failings. The Ramban writes, for example, that Avram going to Mitzrayim when there was a famine. Many people argue with the Ramban, but the Ramban says it was a sin. He should have had faith. And the story of Mechiras Yosef, and the story of even Yaakov and Esav, Yaakov taking the blessings by deception, although it had to be done, but there was a cost. Yaakov suffered by the deception of Lavan, the Medrash says, because he took the blessings by deception. David HaMelech struggles with Bathsheba. Now, granted, Chazal say the sin is not as open and obvious as we would think. Bathsheba had a get. But that doesn't mean it's not a sin. And obviously it is a sin, right? When it says anyone who says David sinned is making a mistake, I would add anyone who says David didn't sin is making a mistake. Clearly, an Avera is described. So I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to understand the humanity of these great people, the fallibility of these great people, the mistakes that they make, so we learn from them and we get inspired from them. Yehuda and Tamar, where Yehuda was with a prostitute and comes forward and confesses to the truth. And she was not going to reveal his identity because she would not embarrass him in public. So, in some ways, taking out the emotions and taking out the human feelings and taking out the fallibilities is actually a disservice, because it prevents us from absorbing the very lessons the Torah wants to communicate to us. However, we have to understand at the same time that at the end of the day, we are dealing with people who are much, much, much greater than us. And therefore, their sins have to be understood in the context of the level that they're on. So David HaMelech is a good example. Literally, it says he committed adultery and murder. Chazal say it wasn't adultery because Bathsheba had a get. It wasn't murder of her husband because he was deserving of death because he rebelled against the royal order. So yes, it wasn't a sin in the gross way that a criminal would commit it. Mechilas Yosef, they had a whole cheshbon that Yosef was trying to destroy them, and therefore they felt Yosef was a rodef. Yes, explanations, because the sin wouldn't be as gross. I think the test is any sin that even we wouldn't do, we're not going to attribute to the others. Nobody would sell their brother into slavery, right? So, but the point is, the fact that we redefine the Avera doesn't mean it didn't exist on some level, and it's important that we recognize that. And the world of emotion is also a reality. I'll tell you this. I also read a lot of Gedolim biographies, and sometimes modern Gedolim were portrayed as not having feeling, not having emotion, not knowing the names of their grandchildren, not knowing their children's birthdays. This is a tremendous disservice because this is creating a model of a person who's supposed to be a robot, an automaton. It's not factually true. So I'm not criticizing the Gadol. But this is creating a model. And I'll tell you the danger of this. The danger of it is that you can have an Avrech or a Ben Torah who reads these types of biographies and decides to internalize that type of life in his own family. I'm not going to talk to my kids because so-and-so didn't talk to his kids. This is a chorban. That's why I had a commission on this. I advertise all the time that people should read biography of Rav David Feinstein, or Rav Moshe Feinstein as well, where you see people who were Gedolei Torah, B'chala Torah Kula. And yet they were loving, they were feeling, they were caring. They didn't kind of use the Torah as a way to escape human connections and human context. I think it's vitally important in our yeshivas that we communicate that there's a world of feeling and not just a world of the mind. And part of being a religious Jew is to be a person who's capable of loving relationships, who has a world of emotion. And sometimes that gets distorted and that gets atrophied, and that is not a good thing. So the question is a very, very good question. It's a very good point.
Thank you. A very informative answer. Number 5. How much Torah do people who are working for a living, come home late and tired, need to learn?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's very, very important that every Jew who wants to keep Hashem's laws has to make time for the regular study of Torah. Now, I understand that people's time are very limited and their energies are limited, and you work a whole day, you're very tired, either in the morning or at night, and you have to also help your family in different ways. So it's very, very difficult to carve out the time, but you have to carve out time. Now, the more the better, of course, but if you could do 15 minutes in the day and 15 minutes at night, that would be a wonderful thing. Again, I don't mean to suggest you shouldn't try for more, but that much of a commitment, I think virtually everybody can make. And we live in an age where the opportunities for Torah study have never been as widely available as they are. For English speakers, of course, everything is translated. I guess I don't know, I guess everyone here is an English speaker, but whatever. On the internet, YouTube and Torah Anytime and many others as well have so many lectures, so many courses, so many shiurim. So it's like God is taking away your excuse not to learn. There's also a series of books that ArtScroll publishes that I like very much. They're small booklets. It's called A Daily Dose of Torah. It's kind of like 10 pages that you read every day. It has like a Mishnah, it has a halacha, it has a little passage from the Gemara and a Musar thought. And therefore, you can kind of expose yourself to a wide variety of very digestible Torah in like a 10-page read in the course of a day. And it's even given a calendar date, the Gimel Kislev, you have some. So some people find that very congenial because that way they're actually given an assignment that they can cover in the day. So I would say that as a minimum, one should try the 15 minutes, morning and night. The more, the merrier, of course. And Shabbat, you should try to do more. And Sundays. Now in Israel, Sunday is a regular work day. So there's no particular Sunday extra time. But I know in America, I assume in Europe as well, Sunday is an off day. And although obviously there are going to be home responsibilities, but one should try, I think, on Sunday at least, to make some extra time for learning. But it is important that some learning be done every day. And the truth is, that's going to change your day and even change your life. I think it'll energize you. It'll give you simcha, because we say the learning of Torah gives a person inner joy. And in fact, it may give you the enthusiasm to learn more once you start it. And it can change your relationship with your spouse and with your children, be a better husband, a better father. So it may seem like, I don't have time for anything more, but I think you'll see that once you open the gate, it'll become a very healthy addiction, which will be hard for you to break. And obviously, when you have teachers in your community, they're people that you should turn to in whatever way that you can.
Thank you. I want you to assure the audience that that was not a paid advertisement for the Sunday kollel that we have here.
Okay. Baruch Hashem, I'm glad you have it.
I don't know how much time the Rav has. Do we have a few more minutes?
Yeah, we're fine. We're okay.
Okay, thanks. So next question, children in Eretz Yisroel, children in Chutz La'aretz are exposed to much more of certain kinds of material than children in Eretz Yisroel. I don't think the question means Tosfos. How do we raise them in a way that still shelters them to whatever extent possible?
Yeah, well, again, first of all, even in Eretz Yisrael, if you're not in a strict Haredi family, you have kind of the same problems. But yeah, I think that the emphasis, there's an old saying that the best way to dispel darkness is by lighting a candle. Ribui ha'or is doches hachoshech. So we can't put all of our efforts in telling our kids what they can't do. You cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this. Rather, what happens is, by creating in the home and in the school and in the shul an atmosphere of simcha and joy in avodas Hashem, so mimela, automatically, they'll be less interested. See, when you build your Yiddishkeit on no, 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 the kids feel deprived. They feel cheated. They feel resentful. And they feel rebellious. So you got to emphasize the positive. Rav Moshe Feinstein once said that the old Yiddish saying, "It's a schwer zu sein a Yid." It's hard to be a Jew, which is a common Yiddish saying. Turned off a whole generation of Jews who said, "Well, why do I have to live a hard life if I could assimilate and live an easier life?" Of course, one of the things we're discovering, by the way, is that one of the lessons of anti-Semitism is don't think if you assimilate, you'll have an easier life, meaning the Goyim are going to hate you no matter what. That's actually a bracha of anti-Semitism. But okay. So I think that we got to create positivity. We got to create simcha. We got to create excitement. And then, you have to have rules. I'm not saying you don't have rules, but the rules should not be the dominant thing. Chazal give us a very important formula in raising a child. Yamin mekarevet. The yamin, is the stronger hand, your right hand. The dominant emotion in raising a child should be love and affection. And the discipline, which is pushing the child away from things, that should be with the left hand. That should be weaker. Unfortunately, sometimes in religious homes, the balance goes the other way around, where the no's and the discipline and the restrictions become dominant. We got to, I think, move in the other way. But having said that, what can I tell you? There is no fail-safe way to insulate people totally. Here in Yerushalayim, Ben Yehuda Street, which is relatively benign, but it's more of a modern place, is less than half a mile from Meir Shorim, right? So things mix in. But once again, let's take something like internet use, right? So one might say, I don't want a computer in my house. I don't want internet in my house. It's tameh, right? Well, you have to think about this, because given the fact that kids will be exposed to this one way or the other, either in school or by a friend or the like, maybe it's better to give them the tools to use it in a good way instead of telling them you can't do it at all. We have to make a cheshbon here. Sometimes tafasta meruba like tafasta. You try to do too much, you don't accomplish anything. So it's a very difficult question for parents, and I appreciate it. But I think sometimes we have to avoid the dangers of being overly strict, because it may produce a result that is less good than being a little bit more open on certain things.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Next, what is the halachic modus operandi regarding spending money? Why should I give tzedakah, and do mitzvot affect my income?
Yeah, so it's interesting that it says in the Shema, you shall love Hashem with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might. Now, what is the phrase all of your might? So Rashi gives two explanations. One explanation is midah, whatever God gives you, whether it's punishment or good things, you should accept it. But the other pshat Rashi gives is with all of your money. You serve God with your money. Now, Judaism is not ascetic. We don't believe you should live on bread and water. We don't believe you should sleep on nails. You should enjoy life. Rabbi Avigdor Miller, who was a great tzaddik, often talked about the idea that you enjoy life and then you think about God as the one who gave you the pleasures of life, and that becomes a way of being grateful to Hashem. He has a classic essay on what you think about when you eat an apple or a banana. I can't do justice to it, but it's like a 20-page description of the color, of the taste, and the texture, and all of these things. So Judaism says there is a role for you to use your money to spend on things that bring you pleasure. In fact, even in the law, in terms of tzedakah, it mentions you shouldn't give more than 20% because you need to have an ability to support your family. And so, however, the idea of tzedakah is very much based on the notion that we are here to emulate God. God is compassionate. God is giving. God gives of his resources to others because everything we have is from God. So God gives me wealth, not just for myself. God gives me wealth to help others who are needy. And therefore, when I give tzedakah, in fact, the word tzedakah is very interesting. Tzedakah is always translated as charity, but it's been pointed out that in Lashon HaKodesh, it is actually connected to justice. Very interesting. It's not just charity, it's justice. There is a justice that I share with other people because that is why Hashem gave me the wealth, not just for myself. So tzedakah is one of the most important ideas in Judaism. It reflects unity. It reflects Ahavat Yisrael. It reflects compassion. It emulates the divine. When a person lives for himself, then his life ceases to have meaning. What did Hillel say in Pirkei Avos? Imein ani li mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? I got to be for myself, yes. But shani li atzmi. But if I only care about myself, ma ani, what am I? I'm a zero. A meaningful life involves caring for others. And part of how we care for others is by giving tzedakah. So Judaism is a balance between the legitimate needs of self-preservation and pleasure, which can enhance gratitude to Hashem, and the achrayut, the responsibility you have to help other people in need. And that creates a meaningful life. That creates a good life. That creates a life where midah keneged midah, I care about people. I care about your suffering. God will care about my suffering. Reciprocity. Hashem behaves to us the way we behave towards others. Kol ha-merachim al habrios, one who has rachamim, one who has mercy on God's creatures. Merachimim olav min hashamayim, God will show you mercy. So those are things to think about. I know that Ayn Rand, who happened to be Jewish, but Ayn Rand advocated a philosophy of selfishness. And whatever her reasons, all I can tell you is that Judaism is premised on exactly the opposite idea. We're here to help others.
Okay. Thank you. If I can get one last official question in here, I'll just end with this one. There's a whole list, but I don't think we have time for all of them. How will we know the true Mashiach when he comes?
Yeah, that's a very serious issue, because people say, if Chabad, if the Mashiach is Chabad, Satmar is not going to accept it. If it's Satmar, Chabad won't accept it. So they asked the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, they asked him once, is Mashiach going to be a Chassid or a Misnagid? So the Alter Rebbe said, it's a joke, but he said, Mashiach for sure will be a Misnagid. Because if he's a Misnagid, the Chassidim will still accept him. If he's a Chassid, the Misnagdim won't accept him. So he has to be Misnagid, because that's the only way the Misnagdim will accept him. If Yaakov Kamenetsky once said that Mashiach will be like Esther Hamalka. The Gemara interprets by Esther Hamalka, everybody who saw Esther Hamalka thought she was of his nationality. If I was English, I said, oh, Esther's a nice British woman, French, German, whatever it would be, because she embodied the positive traits of every nation. Mashiach is going to embody all of the positive traits. So Chabad will say, oh, I knew he was Chabad, Satmar, he was Satmar. Oh, he was Yeshivish, he was Haredi, he was modern Orthodox. That's you or me. Mashiach will have all of the tastes. But how will we know? So the truth of the matter is, it is quite complicated. And, I don't even have a definitive answer. I'll just tell you what the Rambam says. The Rambam says that the revelation of Mashiach comes in a two-stage process. There is a certain process after which we can say he is a presumptive Mashiach, but we don't know for sure. And then there's a second level in which he then is elevated to Vadai Mashiach. So you first have to get to what is called Becheskas Mashiach. In other words, at that point, I'm allowed to assume he's Mashiach. And then you get to what is called Vadai Mashiach. So the Cheskas Mashiach, the Rambam says there are a number of conditions. Of course, he has to be righteous. He has to be of the family of David HaMelech. He has to bring Jews back to Torah. And he has to bring many Jews back to Eretz Yisroel. And at that point, you're allowed to assume he's Mashiach. And if he wants to build the Beis HaMikdash, we listen to him. If he succeeds in building the Beis HaMikdash, then you know for sure he's Mashiach. Which means the Rambam is suggesting it's possible for a person that we assume was the Mashiach, but he actually does not wind up being the Mashiach because he's not zocheh to build the Beis HaMikdash. Now, what that means practically, I honestly don't know. Meaning, I'll give you the circularity. There's a certain circularity, and that is what? I don't assume somebody's a Cheskas Mashiach till he gathers the ingathering of Israel and brings them back. Well, but if he's not yet B'cheskas Mashiach, why should I listen to his call? What's going to make me listen to his call to go to Eretz Yisrael if he's not B'cheskas Mashiach till we get to Eretz Yisrael? right? These are some questions. So apparently, the Rambam acknowledges that it is possible for people to form their own beliefs even before there's a halachic category of Cheskes Mashiach, and they'll go on their own accord. And then, if enough people go, at that point it becomes a Cheskes Mashiach. But the short answer basically is that this is a very long-winded response. I honestly don't know. And the Rambam writes generally that a lot of aspects of the Messianic redemption will be understood in hindsight. In other words, we don't know ahead of time what it will be, but as these things happen, we will gain greater clarity. So, B'ezras Hashem, I hope the answer to your question will come very, very, very soon. And then we'll be able to know for sure what is going on.
Thank you so much. It's been incredible for me. I imagine that I'm not the only one who feels like that. And very interesting, both chizuk and practical, and just some things that we don't usually think about. We really, really appreciate the Rav's valuable time. The Rav is very, very busy in Ohr Somayach, aside from all the other things he does. We really appreciate the valuable time, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I just want to give you all, we're thinking of you, and the fact that, Baruch Hashem, you have been zocha to reestablish Torah and Yadus and mitzvos on the ground that has been soaked with blood for so many years is really a testament to the eternity of Torah, and the fact that, remember when Hananiah ben Teradyon was being burnt by the Romans, and they wrapped a Sefer Torah around him, and he was being burned to death, and he was asked what he saw, and he said, I see a Torah scroll being burnt, but the letters are flying to heaven, and the letters are never destroyed. And really what you're doing is a testament to that. 75 years ago, whatever, bodies were destroyed, but the soul was never destroyed, and the Torah comes back, and it reemerges, and it comes out. So I hope that you too will be blessed to go Mechayel El Chayel in all of your important work. And again, we so much appreciate your tefillas for Eretz Yisroel and Am Yisrael, and may all of this be a precursor to the Geula Shlema B'mheira V'yameinu.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.